Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mark Andrew Holochak, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 3 of The Real Thomas Jefferson, a series in which we try to get at the person behind the words of some 19,000 letters and so many other things that in which he was involved, to the benefit, for the most part, to the benefit of our country, to the state, our country, and the world, in my estimation. And today I'd like to talk to you about the title of the episode to be Why Jefferson's Failed Investment in Popular Democracy is Why We Remember Him and Why We Love Him. Now, there seems to be a consensus, a rough consensus, in the general secondary literature that Thomas Jefferson's political vision just didn't work. And I think a typical someone who typifies that sentiment is Gordon Wood, who writes in an essay called Thomas Jefferson's Time. No one of the revolutionary leaders believed more strongly in progress and in the capacity of the American people for self government than did Jefferson. And no one was more convinced that the Enlightenment was on the march against the forces of medieval barbarism and darkness, of religious superstition and enthusiasm. And he goes on to add Jefferson had always invested so much more of himself intellectually and emotionally in the future and in popular democracy than Madison had. Jefferson was inspired by a vision of how things could be and should be. Madison tended to accept things as they were. Jefferson had nothing but the people and the future to fall back on. They were really all that he ever believed in. That's why we remember Jefferson and not Madison. The last line is, I thought, rather curious, right? Is that Jefferson, because of his failed vision, he believed in the people and he had a hope for the future, right? And Wood, I think, when you read his writings, holds Jefferson accountable for being naive in both cases, that the people could not be trusted to run their own affairs, at least. That's the sense I get from reading Wood. And believing that the future was necessarily going to be better. Wood thinks Jefferson was naive. So I'm going to look at that. So in effect, what Wood is arguing is that we love Jefferson and remember Jefferson and not Madison because of Jefferson's naivete. Because Madison had a realist perspective on the way things work. Jefferson didn't. Jefferson was sort of pie in the sky, and that's why we remember Jefferson, not Madison. Now, Jefferson, there are two things. Jefferson thought that the future certainly was not going to be like the past, but he thought it would be better, right? Future generations would suffer the enlightenment of more inventions and scientific inventions that would make human living easier, human labor more efficient. They would also suffer the benefits of, by suffer, I just mean experience. They'd also suffer the benefits of numerous more scientific discoveries, right, that teach us about how the world works, so to enable humans to fit better in it, right? Um, so he was really a child of the Enlightenment. There's no question in my mind of that. In an 1823 letter, he writes to Greek Corre. He says the government of Athens was that of the people of one city making laws for the whole country subjected to them. That of Lacedaemon was the rule of military monks over the laboring class of the people, reduced to abject slavery. These are not the doctrines of the present age. The equal rights of man and the happiness of every individual are now acknowledged to be the only legitimate objects of government. So again, the two objects of government, the equal rights of man. In his draft declaration, he begins with human equality, right? And people are deserving of rights because of human equality. And the happiness of every individual are the objects of government. So the government's job is to pave the way so individual citizens can, you know, make their own happiness. And the best way to do that is to secure for them their rights, right? So Jefferson always talked of republicanism as an experiment in that he approached Jeffersonian republicanism, government of and by the people through elected representatives and so forth, participatory government, where all people were participating in governmental affairs, at least at the local level, to the fullest capacity, to their fullest capacity. Participation was so important for Jefferson. You can't have a thriving government of and by the people if the people aren't massively involved to the fullest extent. He writes to John Tyler, no experiment can be more interesting than what we're now trying, and which we trust will end in establishing the fact that man may be governed by reason and truth, veridicality, right? The use of reason, rationality. And Jefferson, in many places, talks of this as an experiment. It's one place, at least, he calls it a great experiment. So I talk about he approaches this through eliminative reasoning. In other words, there are two sorts of government that are viable. One is aristocracies, government of the few, namely a single person, a monarch, or some group of a few people that are deemed to be best capable of running, or government by the many, in Jefferson's case, by the people, right? Where all the people have a capacity to participate and decide governmental affairs. They're electing their representatives, if only. Okay, now there are three questions that I think have a bearing on this. Question one, why did Jefferson think that the people were qualified to pick out and oversee their political leaders? Well, the answer to that question is that they were endowed with a moral sense, with a capacity for feeling or sensing the right thing to do in circumstances, even complex circumstances. They could ferret their way out of it by feeling their way out of it. So that each person had, in equal capacity, a moral sense. So all people were at the same level of equality in many respects to be able to decide issues. So he said sound moral sensibility and a basic education would enable people to judge of their own affairs and judge and run things politically through elected representatives. Second question, what reason did Jefferson have for believing that the people knew best what was in their own interest? What was in their own best interest? John Stuart Mill tackles the same question, and Jefferson's answer is similar. Um, he, what makes us think that other people, what would make me believe that another person can determine what is in my best interest for me better than I can, even if the person is better educated? I know myself, I know my wants, I know my needs, and presumably do, and to have another decide for me whether I should be a lawyer or a farmer, for example, how I should live my life, and so forth. Jefferson just thinks that this is wrong. Each person needs to have the liberty to choose his own path in life. The third question, why did Jefferson think that the libertarianism, I use that in quotes because libertarian is a more contemporary term, um, think that the libertarianism that his notion of Republican entailed would lead to contented, even happy citizens? Now, this third question is a bit more difficult to answer because he never saw anything like the sort of corporate capitalism that we have today and the special interests today that dictate political matters. And he never saw the sort of runaway consumerism that we have today. Um, he thought if you left things to the people and left things to the sensibility of the people would decide. And he never saw the sort of runaway capitalism that we sort of experience today through special interest groups and so on. So it's a more difficult question here, and I think, but still, he thought government needs to stay out. What he got right, I think, is that government needs to stay out of individuals' affairs, right? Um, so what we're left, I mean, Jefferson saw republicanism, as I said, as an experiment. He saw in his attempts at implementation, he saw glitches, he saw retrogradations, right? Um, he saw depravity. He writes in 1809, the interest I've taken in the success of the experiment, whether a government can be contrived which shall secure man in his rightful liberties and acquirements, has engaged a longer portion of my life than I had ever proposed, and certainly the experiment could never have fallen into a more inauspicious more inauspicious times when nations have openly renounced all the obligations of morality. Talking about global tensions, France, England, and of course the tension between the United States, England, and to a lesser extent France as well. If it can pass safely through the ordeal of the present trial, we may hope to have set an example which will not be without consequences favorable to human happiness. The idea here is that Jefferson's Republican experiment needs to pass through the trying times and see if government by the people, if we can still have, without lapsing into sort of autocracy, still if we can have government by the people and go through the trying times. Now, if you read the secondary literature, people like Morton Frisch, William Howard Adams, Walter Lefevre, and so forth, Gordon Wood, Forrest McDonald, it's generally fairly hostile apropos of Jefferson. Basically, the notion is that Jefferson's vision of government of and by the people run through elected officials, Jefferson's belief in human goodness, Jefferson's optimism, all were episodes or illustration of his profound naivete that perhaps Adams and Hamilton got it better because they distrusted the people and they insisted that a system of strong, Adams, strong discourses on Davila, strong checks and balances, right, to manage governmental affairs because the people who were rulers couldn't be trusted. And, you know, it may be, right? Forrest McDonald argued, and I think quite interestingly, that the problem with Jefferson's system is that it worked really well when he was president, especially in his first term, but it demanded that someone like Jefferson would be at the helm all the time. It demanded that, I think he'd say something stronger, that Thomas Jefferson be at the helm. Without Jefferson, the system couldn't work. Um, the people around which he surrounded himself, his cabinet, were people loyal to him. There was a lot of agreement, a lot of concord in his cabinet. He got the bills passed that he wanted to get passed in the Congress, and so there's a lot of concord. Even I would say probably in his second term as president. But ultimately, the sort of agrarianism, the sort of government that he envisaged, did not work, or at least did not obtain, right? And the country slid in a sort of Hamiltonian direction, and all such people all such scholars blame Jefferson for prodigious naivete, and there's to some extent, is true. Now, I interviewed with a group of Arizonan Republicans, and they wanted to question me, get my opinions. We were doing a Zoom conference. They wanted to get my opinion on voter integrity. That was the issue. Of course, they wanted to know, well, we got all the problems today of voter fraud and so forth and so on, and want to know what Jefferson would say. And one of the things I started off by saying, it's so difficult. People always, there are two groups of people. People who want to read Jefferson because they want to blame him for everything that's going wrong today. He's the cause. Today's racism is a result of Thomas Jefferson, right? Not freeing his slaves or whatever, not doing more. Connor Cruz O'Brien calls him, says he can rightly be called the father of the Ku Klux Klan. What a stupid comment. But anyway, so what so we're talking about voter integrity. And one of the things I said, and I'm sure it didn't sit well with some of the people, I said, I sort of dislike when we always go back for Thomas Jefferson to try to solve our problems. And so, what would Jefferson say? Jefferson would say, these are our problems. These aren't my problems. These weren't the same problems that existed in my day, at least not the same. So the point is, Jefferson, he was an optimist. He always believed that the future is getting better. People are getting more moral. People are getting smarter, and every generation on the whole is getting more moral and smarter. Maybe he's naive in those respects, but I think you can make a case that he wasn't. So my answer was that these are Thomas, those were our problems today, our problems playing around with racism, sexuality, um, and so forth. These are our problems. So, it might be interesting to play around with what Jefferson might think, but the, the world in which we live today is so radically different. It's so much smaller than it was in Jefferson's day. I think it's just sort of unfruitful to try to fall back upon Jefferson and try to think that he might have, the sort of wisdom to solve our problems today. So I'm sure that answer, at least prima facie, didn't sit well with some people, and I think with others, it's sort of they got the gist of it and that they digested the message, but it's sort of what I think Thomas Jefferson, I want to go back to Gordon Wood's thing is why we love Thomas Jefferson because of his naivete, right? Um, because he believed in the future, because he believed in the people. And what else can you do? I think what we can learn from Jefferson, the main thing is to have faith in ourselves, to take it upon ourselves. I told the Republicans, the Arizonans, to let's fall back and try to figure out and do what you're doing, try to solve our own problems ourselves. Not worry about what Thomas Jefferson would say. Get inspiration from him, but don't look for solutions from Thomas Jefferson. So, as Wood was hinting at, or Wood stated, what can we learn from Thomas Jefferson? We can trust ourselves. We can take ownership of our problems. These are our problems, right? These are not Thomas Jefferson's problems. He's not going to solve them for us. These are our problems. We can come up with our own solutions, and we need to come up with our own solutions. One of the things we need to do is stop being so damn partisan. He hated partisanship, believe it or not. He just did. And um, I think that's what Jefferson has to teach us today. We love Thomas Jefferson. At least some of us love some of us love him. We remember and love him, and we still discuss him because of his almost incurable optimism. We need optimism. We need reverence of important early figures in our country, and we need optimism uh, about the present time, that the problems of the present time can be solved. We need optimism about the future, right? So taking ownership and just being optimistic. That's what Jefferson has to teach us, is that let's take ownership of our problems and let's believe in ourselves and work towards a better future. Hope you enjoyed that talk. That's all I have. We'll do another one at another time. And TTFN, ta ta for now.